always, for letting me stop by and talk some Canes football, Canes recruiting. And like you mentioned, the football season is right around the corner. I believe we're at 74 days, if I'm not mistaken, till kickoff here in my backyard, August 31st in Gainesville, where Miami will open up against the in-state rival. And yeah, to your point, man, we're reaching the last weekend visits of June. Anybody who follows recruiting like myself, this is the time of the year where, some guys start to lock in their spots. Others, start to head to another program that, most maybe thought, weren't interested at a time. And that seems to be going around not just Miami, but other programs as well. But we'll be diving right into it. And anybody that follows Miami Hurricanes football recruiting, especially right now, we're on commit watch, right? It's 6:43 p.m. Eastern time right now. I believe our guy Dennis Smith just dropped the bat signal about 5-10 minutes ago. So we'll be getting a commit here close to around 7:15 tonight. And I have a very good idea of who that possibly could be. So we could get to talking to some recruiting.
Sounds good to me. Aside from that announcement that we hope to get in while we're on the air here, what's been the latest? I mentioned to you before we started to record that, I do my typical scouring of the internet, just do Miami football news, recruiting targets, just to see what I can find. So I'm somewhat caught up to speed. Saw a few guys. I don't know how serious Miami was, but a couple guys that were on the offer board that went elsewhere here just in the last few days. But that's all that I was able to pick up. So that's why we've got you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into the recruit tonight that will be committing here shortly, it should be an offensive lineman from everything I've been hearing, and it's a pretty good one. But we'll talk about him shortly. But you talk about some of these recruits that are starting to help go elsewhere or commit to other schools. Right off the bat, you had guys like Andrew Purcell and Eric Winters, who are actual teammates who both visited Miami at one point earlier in the month of June. Both of those guys ended up committing to SEC programs within the last few days. Andrew Purcell committing to Kentucky and Eric Winters committing to Auburn, I believe. So with those two being out, your secondary target list starts to get a little bit slimmer, right? When you talk about just last weekend's visitors alone, you had guys like Amari Wallace from Miami Central there in your backyard, who it seems like Miami and him continue to do a lot of great relationship bonding between the two, and it seems like Miami's in a very good spot. Louisville is really the only team right now to watch out for Amari Wallace, but from everything positive I've heard over the past weekend, Amari Wallace was one of many guys that really came out of the weekend with Miami at the top of the list. Other than Amari Wallace in the secondary room, you had guys like Chris Ewald, who will be making his commitment June 27th within the next 9-10 days, which is going to be between Miami and Georgia, which again, Miami feels they're in a very good spot of landing someone like Chris Ewald. So you get those two guys. And then, of course, the prize and jewel of the class is, of course, DJ Pickett, as we know, who's one of the top secondary players in the country. Every school in the nation wants him. This is a guy that can come to Miami day one and potentially start right away. And DJ Pickett and Miami obviously have a lot of family ties. You got Booker Pickett, who is currently on the football team, who was recruited in this past class at defensive end, is on the team. You're obviously going after DJ Pickett this class, and then next class you have another Pickett as well at the offensive lineman, who's one of the top offensive linemen in the country in your backyard. So Miami's trying to do a good job at locking down all the Picketts to be Hurricanes. But those are the three guys at the secondary right now within the last 5 or 6 days to really watch out for with Miami. And then, of course, with this weekend's visitors, you got guys like Ben Hanks, Hilton Drake Stubbs, Bryce Fitzgerald. Those are going to be pretty much rounding out the rest of the guys that you're targeting in the secondary room within these last 2 weekends of visits. So you definitely want to make sure that you could at least hit on about 50% of those guys, which seems like currently Miami is in a very good spot for.
So the two guys that you mentioned that chose elsewhere, based on the conversations that we've had in recent weeks, you've been on a couple other times setting us up for this big stretch run. It doesn't seem like, sure, they were offered. It would have been nice, but not a big blow there. who would be some of the names based on their ability, but also based on the position that they play, that if they don't come through, start to peck away and are, I know how much you love this football program and how close you are to recruiting, that maybe drive a bit of a stake through your heart and you get that, wanted that one.
I mean, first and foremost, you got to talk about, guys that you still have currently committed in this class, which there's very few, right? We only have about 3 or 4 guys currently committed in this class. But the one that obviously is a huge circle is Elijah Melendez, right? This is a young man that's gone on visits to Ole Miss, Auburn, and then Oklahoma this past weekend. And it seems like every, SEC school he's gone to, there's been a lot of traction towards that school, even though he's currently committed to Miami. But that is one recruit that I've stayed in a lot of good communications with from beginning to end. I've had the pleasure of interviewing multiple times. And that young man loves Miami to death. And one other thing that he loves is his mother. And at the end of the day, his goal is to make sure his mom and his family never have to work again, right? And he's going to make sure, whatever that needs to be done to happen, happens. And we know in this new day and age of recruitment, you gotta follow the process, because now the new way of recruiting, some of this process will benefit a young man and their family in the long run, regardless if you don't think you're going to go to that school or not. And that's just not the day and age of recruitment in high school or transfer portal guys, but that's also in the 7-on-7 circuit too. There are young men that are jumping from one 7-on-7 team to another, just for a money grab, right? And it's the same thing with a recruitment process. And at the end of the day, you're going to take the recruitment process as you should. And I think Elijah Melendez and his camp is doing just that. And, Miami has done a very good job at communicating with someone like Elijah from beginning to end, making sure he's the number one priority at the linebacker room, which if you really look at our board realistically in the linebacker position, we only got about 2 or 3 guys, Elijah and Gavin Nix probably being your top 2 guys that you can even think of being Hurricanes at the moment. And we have him lined up for the last visit. He's already gone to Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Auburn, like I mentioned, and he gets to round it all back out, back at home, back where he's committed, the crib. And I expect Miami to do what they do best, and that's close it out. And Elijah Melendez will stay in Miami Hurricane, and that's a big one to keep, because as we know, you can't just recruit guys at other programs or guys that are uncommitted. You got to have the same emphasis and effort every single day and every single week with the guys currently committed in your class as well, because it goes both ways. But other than him, I think another big one is probably going to be Ben Hanks. Ben Hanks is a kid that is going to be visiting this upcoming weekend. He's already visited Florida. Obviously, Florida State's another team in there. He's a kid that's a Florida prodigy, even though he plays in the backyard of Miami. He had a very good visit with Florida. A lot of positive things in the camp, obviously, with having that mutual connection with Florida. It seems like they've really picked up the pace with the recruitment with Ben Hanks. But again, this is another young man that Miami has prioritized pretty straightforward from beginning to end. And to be quite honest, besides DJ Pickett, Ben Hanks and probably Jabari Antoine, who's committed to LSU, are probably the top 2 guys on our board in the secondary that we seem like we're prioritizing the right way. So Ben Hanks is another guy this weekend that you got to make sure you try to close out and be a Hurricane.
Brad, part of our discussions that I totally appreciate, and I pick up a lot in regards to this, is because of the back channels that you work, and because of the conversations that you have and the connections and so forth, and then just the knowledge of the Miami program, but also the high school circuit and the state of Florida in particular, having that feel, that knowledge of what's happened in the past and what those relationships are. So with Mario Cristobal in play, Mike Norvell's been at Florida State about 5 or 6 years. You got Billy Napier, a 3rd season at Florida, and now UCF, they're playing power football as well, of course, in Orlando with Gus Malzahn, who certainly accomplished a ton. Has the dynamic changed in regards to, of course, the closer to Tallahassee, to Miami, Coral Gables, Gainesville, of course, the more likely those slightly more likely they are to gravitate to those schools. But are there particular hot spots, cold spots that have existed that maybe Mario Cristobal's trying to work one way or the other, in terms of the way this state leans one way or the other?
It's funny you asked that question, Mark, because it kind of changed this past cycle. To be quite honest with you, the first two cycles with Mario here, we did a very good job in creating a very big emphasis and priority strictly on the guys in our backyard. We made sure we prioritize those guys mostly from beginning to end, and we try to get as many as possible. This cycle is a little bit different actually, and a lot of it has to do with where the state of the program is heading, right? Where we expect to be heading. And that's college football playoff realm, right? We're in the third year with Mario Cristobal. You brought in a premier quarterback in Cam Ward, a premier running back, Damian Martinez, surround him with great playmakers. You already have a pretty good established offensive line. You brought in a unanimous amount of monsters on the defensive side of the football to already pair with guys from the last two classes as well. So this is an all-in year where, unfortunately, Mark, some of these guys in our backyard, we're actually looking at other guys, maybe more in the Central Florida area or Georgia or Alabama, because those are more the five-star caliber guys, because we're expected to land or go after those guys when it's all said and done if we have the year we're having. Cortez Mills is a prime example, along with Nashawn Montgomery, in my opinion, who are two wide receivers who could easily play at the University of Miami, in my opinion. Definitely have the talent. But it seems like Miami is looking elsewhere right now. We're going all in on guys like Vernell Brown Jr. and Jamie French, who, again, are five-star caliber wide receivers who could go to anywhere in the country. And instead of not necessarily settling, but taking commitments from some of your local backyard guys that I expect to do well, we're kind of at a wait and see approach with certain position groups, and really hoping that we're going to do what we need to do on the football field to essentially land some of these big whales that we're going to need at the end of the year. But we're still doing a pretty good job. I think, when you look at the wide receiver room, you still got a guy at Tampa and Dallas Wilson, who Miami had this past weekend, who seems like is a really good spot for, even though he's been committed to Oregon for over a year. Miami seems like the team to beat right now. Other than that, you really got guys, in the state of Alabama. You were talking about what are some of the hot spots right now. I would say Orlando. Orlando's probably right where I would start. It's 6:55 right now. In about 5 to 15 minutes, we're going to be getting a commitment from Orlando, Florida, by the name of an offensive lineman. I don't want to kind of ruin the moment for him, but when we talk about this young man, I'll kind of go in depth of why there's a very good comp to Jalen Rivers, in my opinion, to this young man when you turn on the film. But as soon as he makes his announcement, I'll kind of break down his film. But you also got another young man from Orlando that will be making an announcement commitment tomorrow by the name of Jaden Wilkerson. This was a offensive lineman, 6'7", 330 pounds. He visited Miami a couple weekends ago. And he's between Miami, Rutgers, UCF, and Syracuse at the moment. He's a kid that transferred to Edgewater, Orlando this past offseason. So this being his senior year and transferring to Edgewater, he's hoping to play against some better competition, which will really give the staff a pretty good idea from an evaluation standpoint where a young man like Jaden Wilkerson stands. Because when you look at our tackle board, from a realistic standpoint, we don't have many options right now until we start playing football games. So you hope to get some of those other guys that we're not really, in contention for or committed to other programs to maybe feel a little bit more pressure with Miami once we start winning football games. But Jaden Wilkerson's one that's a three-sport athlete. Like I said, he's got a lot of comp to Jalen Rivers. And we had a decommitment in Lamar Williams from Havana, Florida, a few months ago. And he was a little undersized, 6'6", 270, a guy that, I think has to put still a lot more weight on. These guys that we're going after today and tomorrow are guys that are the 6'6", 6'7" range, already got 300 pounds, play multi-sports. Both of these guys will have huge basketball backgrounds, so I'll talk about the other one once he commits here shortly. But Jaden Wilkerson is one name to watch. He'll be an announcement his commitment tomorrow as well at offensive line.
So, of course, once they started playing football at the end of August, then you got that proof of concept component where the university, the location, the brand, the history, all these things are in play. Mario's a great recruiter, so is his staff. But then, depending on the player, some of them. The season, the results mean more than others. It all depends on their perspective and what they're looking for. But until we get to Gainesville on August 31st, there are good signs and predictions out there from observers, and I have yet to make my prediction on the season. But 247 Sports, for example, one of their writers in particular, I don't know that it was a 247 composite of writers, but one particular writer came out with 11-1 this week. So that has to help, that there's optimism for this season, that there's expectations that are high.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, again, we're in third year of Mario Cristobal. When you look at the roster on paper, from top to bottom, there isn't really any weak position groups besides maybe the secondary, specifically the safety room. But other than that, I mean, we're in an all-in approach. We're in the era of college football now, with when the gates have kind of opened up for more teams to enter that college football playoff. This is going to be Miami's year to shine. And if we can't get it done with a quarterback caliber like Cam Ward, with some of the pieces we've surrounded him with, not only on the offense side of the ball, but the defense side of the ball, I don't know if we'll ever get it done. So I think, you're seeing this national media approach of where they feel Miami can go this year for a reason. And there's a lot of obvious reasons. And I think the great thing about all this is a lot of these questions that we're wanting answers to, we'll get them, first week in the swamp against Florida, because at the end of the day, regardless what Florida's record was last year or what it may be at the end of this year, playing week 1 in the swamp, first game of the year, you're not going to go in there untouched. It's going to be a battle. So this is going to be a game for Miami, their own players, our fans, a lot to prove. So this is a must-win approach, and it starts week 1 in Gainesville.
Falconer TRX, appreciate you being here. Firing up the live stream on a Tuesday with Brad. So we appreciate Brad accommodating us this week. This is our Hurricanes Live with Brad this week. Cam's on vacation, won't be here Wednesday night. So thanks to Brad, because we knew that we would have a recruiting angle to talk about. Definitely. When you look at this staff, Brad, who can we credit after Mario himself in regards to who are the guys that are really getting this done?
To be quite honest with you, with Mario and his staff, the way he's kind of built this program, it's been an all-in approach from many guys. I don't think you can really credit one guy. I think it's really just goes by position group. I think, at the end of the day, anyone that follows recruiting, Dennis Smith, even though he does a lot of stuff on social media, especially with our bat signals and getting the fans hyped, he does so much behind the scenes that I don't think fans really realize. And I don't think that guy ever sleeps either, besides Mario Cristobal. So shout out to him. Shout out to Coach Fields as well. You also got guys like Ed Pata, Mike Rump behind the scenes, Coach Bain as well, Coach Chevis Jackson. You got Coach Nicholson. All those guys. Even Coach Mirabal. I think, you got to give credit to Coach Mirabal and Coach Pata and Coach Bain for tonight and tomorrow's commitment. I would say, right? You're going to go back-to-back offensive linemen today and tomorrow. And I wouldn't be surprised if, we talked, a few minutes ago about these runs of commitments. I wouldn't be surprised, Mark, if Miami ends up getting 3 to 5 commitments within the next 5 days, to be quite honest with you. Between last weekend's group of visitors, you have potentially, 2 guys that possibly already silently committed to Miami. You got someone announcing a commitment tonight, another one tomorrow. And then you still have this weekend's group of visitors that you can really close out on a few guys as well and really, do some damage and create a huge wave going into the offseason before you got to gear up for big time football. Because after this weekend of visitors, the whole staff will be on vacation for the next couple of weeks before they really have to get back to the nitty gritty and look forward to actual football games and not recruitment. So, guys like Randy Adrika, Miami Central defensive lineman, who I've seen in person, outplay guys like Armando Blunt, who's already on the football team, who a lot of players and fans are raving about. You got to make sure you shore up somebody like Randy Adrika. Ben Hanks, who I mentioned before, you already got Elijah Melendez. Having someone like SJ, the center from Bishop Gorman, And of course, Iose Epinesa, who is a Iowa family tradition right now. It seems like Iowa's the team to beat, but Miami has been the team that has really put a flag in the state of Illinois the past cycle, and I believe they're going to do the same thing this year with Iose. So between those 4 or 5 guys and the next round of guys that were here last weekend, I think you could see a huge run for Miami.
Brett, I heard some figures thrown out online this week. I have no idea what the accuracy of them are, but they were related to NIL. And I'm not going to repeat them because I don't remember how they were so rough, number one, but also, Miami was mentioned, Ohio State, Ole Miss as being, at a certain level in regards to that. Do you have any type of real data or a good idea on how much is being committed to this recruiting effort?
Nah, to be quite honest with you, I don't think anybody has a real gauge of the actual number, unless you're the guy behind the scenes kind of writing the checks. But I think it's pretty clear that Miami isn't stressing, right? If it really came down to a pinch or a battle where NIL was a factor, Miami has already proved that is a discussion that won't be had at the University of Miami. And when you look at most other programs across college football right now, that's been one of those deciding factors that has gotten a player to go elsewhere. So luckily for Miami, we're in good position to not only continue that path, but even the future of success. Miami has really done a very good job with Kane's connection of really setting up a good platform for the future of this NIL thing, because I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. They've already passed NIL for the state of Florida for high school athletes, so we know this thing's not going anywhere. And I think Miami is one of the schools that are going to continue to capitalize on it. As long as we win football games this year, I don't see it being a problem or issue down the road. But other than that, I believe we have a commitment here of Demetrius Campbell out of Orlando Christian Prep. This is a kid that's 6'6", 300 plus pounds. This is a young man that was originally from Maine, grew up playing basketball, had a huge basketball background. Anybody that follows basketball, Cooper Flagg is a name that a lot of people know. This young man played in the AAU circuit with Cooper Flagg, so he has some basketball skills. And he started only playing basketball, and then I believe in 2nd or 3rd grade, this young man was bigger than everyone else in his grade. So kids around him, his friends and family was like, "Hey man, how about you give football a shot?" So he decided to give football a shot in 3rd or 4th grade, and like any other kid, you want to get the ball, you want to be the star player. Well, unfortunately for him, he was so much bigger than anyone else. They threw him on the offensive line, and it was just too boring for him. In 3rd grade, that's not what you want to do playing football, is be playing on the offensive line. So he gave up football very quickly at a young age, stayed committed to basketball. But once he moved from Maine to Florida in the past 2 years, that first week in January, when football coaches started getting a look at this young man before he even started playing football, he was getting offers from Louisville, Rutgers, and Miami. And when he originally toured Christian Prep with his father, it was for basketball only. And when they were taking that tour, I believe the football coach kind of spotted him and knew right away that we're going to try to recruit this young man to play some football, not just basketball. And it ended up turning out to be a really good decision for him. And like I mentioned before, this kid's got basketball background, which many of these offensive linemen this day and age of recruitment does. Has offers from Ole Miss, UCF, Rutgers, and Miami, like I mentioned. And he's had multiple crystal balls to Miami in the past few days. And this is a kid that just committed or will be committing shortly, if I'm not mistaken. Demetrius Campbell out of Orlando Christian Prep is a pretty good player. So you got him at the offensive line position to pair with Taekwon Yu, who we already have, who people compare him to Inez Cooper. And you also got Jaden Wilkerson committing tomorrow night. He'll be making an announcement between Miami, Rutgers, UCF, and Syracuse. Go figure that your 2 offensive tackle targets, both from Orlando, are both being recruited by Rutgers and UCF. So it's a pretty unlikely scenario that you got all 3 schools battling the 2 offensive tackles in the city of Orlando. But Miami has locked down one, and it seems like they're in a good spot to possibly lock in the other one tomorrow.
So, do you have a good feel for either one of those tackle situations? Do you have a good feel for where the lean is?
Well, I mean, so you said the defensive tackles or offensive tackles?
The two that you just mentioned with Rutgers and UCF in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, I think Miami is probably the team to beat for both of them. Demetrius Campbell announcing tonight, obviously, and then Jaden Wilkerson tomorrow. I know Rutgers was one of those teams that really gave him a lot to think about. When you look at Jaden Wilkerson, that's a kid that I really love his film. It's a guy that I would actually give a similar comp to Jalen Rivers out of high school. They're very similar body types, both have a basketball background. When you turn on their tape, there's a lot of comparisons between the two, and we obviously have seen how Jalen Rivers has turned out. So as long as Alex Mirabal and Coach Cristobal is here, I'm not really too worried about the 24/7 rankings or the offer sheet for offensive linemen, because at the end of the day, those guys, develop regardless, what the evaluation is. They seem to get the best and the most out of guys. And looking at our current offensive line room, we're not in a bad place. We're not, the best offensive line room in the country, but we're a lot better than where we were a couple cycles ago. And that is huge credit to not only Maribel and Cristobal, but Coach Pat and Coach Bain as well, who do a lot behind the scenes.